Well, good morning and welcome to the Platt Institute's 2020 Virtual Legislative Summit. My name is Laura Ebke, Senior Fellow at the Platt Institute, and I'll be hosting today's panel on occupational licensing. A few notes for those of you in the audience. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers as we move through our event. Please feel free to start asking your questions on today's topic using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will address as many of those as we can. We want to thank our panelists today who come to us from many directions. The challenges in states with the pandemic and assorted issues related to that have required us to be a little flexible as we've moved through the planning for this panel. Our governors have had an assortment of scheduling challenges, and so we very much appreciate Governor Wolf from Pennsylvania, who is joining us in person first for a few comments in a moment. And then we'll leave the question and answer period in the hands of Meg Snead and Katie Spihar from his staff. We're grateful also that Iowa Governor Reynolds was able to take some time to send us a video message, and that Nate Risto from her policy staff will be available to help answer questions in a bit. Governor Ducey's office notified us on Monday that he wasn't going to be able to participate, so we're thankful that Jonathan Riches, a colleague from the Goldwater Institute, a policy institute based in Arizona, will be able to join us to talk about the Arizona experience with universal recognition. So with all that said, I'm pleased to welcome Pennsylvania's Governor, Tom Wolf, to our legislative summit. Governor Wolf was sworn in as Pennsylvania's 47th governor in January of 2015, and in July of 2019, he signed HB 1172, which made Pennsylvania the second state after Arizona to enact a typical universal recognition. Governor Wolf, it's a pleasure to welcome another political science PhD, and I will open the floor to you.
Thanks, Laura. It's good to be here. So you have a PhD too in political science. I tell you, that's great. Well, I really appreciate being able to be here, and I think this is really an important topic. We're all working diligently to try to work through this and manage this pandemic. But one of the things that we found is that the record-breaking levels of unemployment have just been magnified by the things that we're trying to address here. Right now, more than ever, it's more important to make sure that we're making it easier for Americans to get to work, not make it harder. There's already enough barriers and roadblocks. So that means we have to take full account of all the challenges that Americans face when they go out to look for work. And we have to find ways to remove those barriers for people that are trying to support themselves and their families. So unfortunately, many of the occupational licensure laws, which, as you know, are outdated, and they don't really take into consideration the interconnected nature of our economy or the real challenges that they pose for people who really, we need to do this as a jobs bill. This is really important. And that's why I made occupational licensure a priority in my administration. In 2017, as you say, the second state after Arizona, I signed an executive order directing Pennsylvania's Bureau of Professional and Occupational Affairs to review the Commonwealth's professional licensing process. And I advocated for a series of reforms based on the Bureau's recommendations. Then it was 2019, officially, I guess we became the second state. The General Assembly acted on the first of these recommendations, and that is licensure portability. Our legislature understood the importance of making it easier for new residents who are already trained and licensed in other states to receive a license to work here in Pennsylvania. And we also wanted to make sure that we were ensuring the safety of Pennsylvanians who rely on those licenses and those licensed professionals. But prior to signing Act 4041, it was a real burden for people who were coming into Pennsylvania with licenses from out of state. Each license had different requirements that applicants had to meet. And for some, this meant that even though they were licensed and they were practicing in another state with similar requirements, they'd have to start all over again when they got to Pennsylvania. This was exceptionally, especially burdensome for military spouses who needed to move frequently. I mean, our National Guard, Pennsylvania, I think is one of the largest, third largest National Guard in the United States. And we have people moving back and forth across state borders all the time. all the time, and it was really tough for them, this lack of portability. So under the new law, all licensing boards and commissions in Pennsylvania are required to issue licenses, certificates, registrations, or permits by endorsement to new applicants who were previously licensed in another state, so long as they meet certain qualifications. And among those in Pennsylvania was the qualifications for licensing in those other states had to be equal to, or the standards had to be stricter than those in Pennsylvania. The law also allows for provisional licenses to be provided while applicants work to finalize outstanding requirements. In the years since the law went into effect, 75 individuals have received a license through this process, and 260 provisional licenses have been granted. But there's more. Licensure reform is at its core about ensuring access to opportunity. Reforms that improve access to opportunity are an important part of the fight against systemic inequality. And that's why this past July 1st, I signed Act 53 of 2020, which removes outdated licensing barriers so that skilled workers with criminal records can get a second chance and start good careers. Again, these are jobs bills. These are bills that make it easier for people to actually get to work in our economy and free us of any obligation to try to support them. They do this themselves. Boards in Pennsylvania can no longer use a person's criminal history from this point on to deny them a license unless their criminal history directly relates to the occupation in which they're seeking licensure. And we're being reasonable here. Each application needs to be individually considered based on the offense and the amount of time that has passed and any personal progress and training the applicant has made before a license can be denied. Notably, the law also allows individuals to seek preliminary decisions to determine whether their criminal history would prevent them from being licensed before they put time and resources into training and education. I'm going to give them a heads up. And it also creates a temporary license for barbers and cosmetologists who received training while they were in a correctional facility and would otherwise be denied a license. This is a step toward their permanent license, the training they received while they were in prison. Occupational licensure reform is a common sense way to allow people to pursue the American dream and build a better life. That's important everywhere, certainly important in Pennsylvania. As I said, it turns out this is a jobs bill. And in the wake of COVID-19, it's more important than ever that we continue to advocate for reforms that will help hardworking Americans, in my case, Pennsylvanians, to put their skills to work. We need this. This is really important. So thank you very much. And now, Laura, let me turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Governor. And I really appreciate all the work that that Pennsylvania has done as a leader in job licensing reform. And as you mentioned, it certainly is a jobs bill, jobs programs in a very big way, and especially crucial in a time when jobs may be different as a result of some of the COVID things that we've been through. And so to make it easier for people to find a job and to create their own job in some instances is a great thing. So thanks again for being with us today. And we will be talking to your staff here shortly. Have a great day. Thanks. Nebraska's neighbors in Iowa also passed a universal recognition bill, but this was just a few months ago. Governor Kim Reynolds became the 43rd governor of Iowa when then Governor Branstad accepted an ambassadorship to China in the Trump administration. She was elected to her first full term as governor in 2018. So I think Adam's in the background and is ready to run Governor Reynolds' video.
Greetings from the Iowa State Capitol. I'm Governor Kim Reynolds, and I appreciate the invitation to this virtual legislative summit. While I certainly wish we could be together in Lincoln, I'm grateful for this chance to exchange ideas across state lines. You know, although Iowa and Nebraska are competitors on everything from football to our business climate, we also have an awful lot in common. Agriculture, renewable energy, and manufacturing are the backbones of our economies. And prior to COVID-19, Iowa had a robust economy, one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. In fact, we had jobs looking for people in every single corner of our state. And right now, everything we're doing is focused on rebuilding that economy with policies that support job creators and innovators, grow wages for Iowans, and expand opportunities. One of the biggest barriers to economic growth continues to be a skilled workforce. In Iowa, we've rolled up our sleeves to meet that growing need. We ramped up STEM education in schools, and we made it easier for businesses to collaborate with students through work-based learning. At our community colleges, we increased the focus on technical trade skills, aligning curriculum with the needs of businesses. We focused on registered apprenticeships and created our new Last Dollar Scholarship to connect Iowans with rewarding careers in high-demand fields. But still, consistently, one of the biggest hurdles in addressing the skills gap was a burdensome and costly licensing system that denied opportunity to those who needed it. Licensing reform has been a top priority of mine, and here's why. 1/4 of Iowans previously must have a professional license to do their job, and that's the second highest in the country, and it's unacceptable. More than just a persistent challenge for professionals, from electricians to nurses, our licensing system has resulted in an estimated loss of 48,000 jobs and I think about $290 million. As governors all across this state will tell you, we are in a national competition to attract America's skilled workforce, and the occupational licensing reform package was crucial to give Iowa a competitive edge. I believe that opportunity lives in Iowa and in the Midwest, and these reforms send a strong message that Iowa is open for business and we welcome you to our state. So on June 25th, 2020, I signed House File 2627, establishing universal licensing recognition in Iowa, and it creates an additional pathway to licensure in our state. It will allow Iowa's licensing board to grant an Iowa professional license to those with an out-of-state license if they meet the following requirements. So they have to be licensed in their profession for at least 1 year, have similar scope of practice in Iowa, and of course they're in good standing in all states where they're licensed. The bill waives license fees for low-income Iowans seeking licensure for the first time in their chosen profession. And it also implements a universal standard for licensing boards as they review criminal histories of applicants, so all Iowans can have a second chance at a great career. One aspect that's unique to Iowa, the bill allows for 3 years of work experience to substitute for any education or training requirement here in our state. And I'm proud to say that I think we were the first state to adopt such a provision. The legislation was a meaningful step forward in reforming professional licensing in our state. It's really allowing us to attract new talent and deliver second chances to Iowans seeking to better their lives. But we still have more work to do, so in my Condition of the State address, I called for a complete review of Iowa's licensing regulations to identify and eliminate licensing requirements that are outdated, redundant, or really have no impact to public health or safety. I want to thank the Platt Institute for putting this workshop together. This has been an opportunity to collaborate, innovate, and share ideas about our path forward in this new remote economy. So thank you for the opportunity to share Iowa's story, and I look forward to our continued partnership as we open new doors, build new bridges, and unleash the innovative spirit that exists within all corners of our nation.
And thanks so much to Governor Reynolds for taking the time to do that. We had to shuffle a lot of things, and I really appreciate the effort of her and her staff. Representing Arizona, we have Jonathan Riches, and John serves as the Director of Litigation and General Counsel for the Goldwater Institute, and he has worked extensively in helping to develop legislation like the Right to Earn a Living Act, which has become a model for many occupational reforms around the country. So, John, can you give us just a little bit of a sense of what's going on in Arizona and where you see things going?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Laura. Thank you to Platt, also to Governor Reynolds and Governor Wolf for their leadership on this issue. I think it kind of goes without saying to those on this call, but occupational licensing is and has been a problem for a very long time. Just to kind of frame it out, in the 1950s, about 5% of all occupations required a license, and those were in the healthcare field, in the law, and other areas more traditionally associated with the public's health and safety. Today, depending on what state you're in, about a quarter to a third of all jobs require an occupational license, some of which have very little, if any, connection to the public's health and safety. Things like chimney sweepers or florists or interior designers or landscape architects. And oftentimes, these criteria are quite arbitrary where, for example, an EMT will only require a few weeks of training and education, whereas something that might have less connection to the public's health and safety require many days of education and experience. So as part of this larger problem, what some policymakers in Arizona and others around the state had observed is that licensing requirements, of course, vary by state. So for example, Michigan requires security guards to be licensed, and you need 3 years of education and training in order to be licensed as a security guard in the state of Michigan. Most states require 12 days or less, some states none at all. So of course, what happens is when people want to move from state to state, which is much more common with our mobility nowadays, they're faced with barriers to entry, oftentimes arbitrary barriers to entry, in the very same profession that they might have been practicing for many years safely and effectively. And as Governor Wolf had mentioned, this is a particular problem for certain demographics. For example, our military families, the unemployment rate prior to the pandemic was below 4%, historic lows across the country. Military spouses reportedly face an unemployment rate of 24%, so more than 6 times what the average unemployment rate was for most Americans. And that's despite very high levels of education among military spouses. So Arizona was the first state to adopt what's known as universal recognition. Governor Ducey at the time made a novel observation that, quote, you don't lose your skills simply because you pack up a U-Haul and make the decision to move to Arizona. So Arizona's law, much like Pennsylvania's and Iowa's, is predicated on a very simple principle. If you've been licensed to practice a particular profession in another state, you become a resident of the state of Arizona. You've practiced for at least a year in good standing. Arizona is going to recognize that license so long as it hasn't been revoked and the licensee isn't subject to investigation, et cetera. The applicant still has to apply in the state of Arizona, but assuming the applicant meets those relatively modest criteria, the person will be licensed in Arizona. Arizona's measure, just by way of comparison, was obviously this issue is bipartisan. We've heard from governors from both sides of the political spectrum. That was our experience here in Arizona as well. It passed out of our House 36-24, out of our Senate 18-11, with one person abstaining. And since it has become law, we've experienced pretty tremendous success. It's been law for a little over a year. There have been 1,806 applications under the law since September. 1,628 have been approved, and most of those are not denials. It's just that they're awaiting additional information from the applicant. So people are making real good use of this law real fast. In terms of what's ahead, already, as we have heard, several states have adopted full versions of universal recognition, including those that are represented on this call. Montana, Utah, Idaho, and Missouri are also included. Some states have recognized universal recognition for military spouses: Ohio, Indiana, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So I think it can be said that at a time when there should be as few barriers to entry as possible, this law is really making it a real impact for people that just want to get to work and have already been safely practicing their professions in other states.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. So in addition to Jonathan, I want to welcome a few other people to our panel, and you may be able to see them already. Katie Spihar is the policy analyst with Governor Wolf's office. Meg Sneed is Governor Wolf's policy secretary, and Nate Risto is policy advisor to Governor Reynolds in Iowa. So be sure to drop your questions in the Q&A, and I see that we've got a few that are already coming up, but let me just kind of get things started while I sort through some of these other questions. Universal recognition as a concept is merely the notion at its very core that a state will choose to recognize licenses with substantially similar scopes from other states for licensure in their own state. It eliminates, except for things that might be jurisdiction specific, or in the case of in the case of there are variations on them, but except for things that are jurisdiction specific, it eliminates a lot of additional education and training, acknowledges that experience doesn't go away just because you move to another state, as Jonathan pointed out. Of course, not every occupation requiring a license is covered in any of these bills, right? Some are exempted. Some are exempted because of existing interstate compacts. Some are exempted for other reasons. Some are exempted just because of the nature of the way that the state is set up and has organized its occupational licensing structure. So could you all talk from each state just a little bit about the scope of licenses covered or not covered under your state's law? And I guess we can start with Pennsylvania.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that.
Okay.
So our Act 41, which is our licensure by endorsement bill, covers all of the licenses that are overseen by our Bureau of Professional and Occupational Affairs within the Department of State. So under BPOA, there's 29 different licensing boards, and they oversee 130 different licenses for individuals. And so these can range anything from a medical doctor to a podiatrist to a landscape architect, crane operator. So there's quite a wide variety of what they oversee, and this is primarily where all of the licenses in Pennsylvania come from. So the only things that our Act 41 don't cover would be lawyers who are overseen by our Supreme Court, EMS and EMTs. They're certified through our Department of Health, and our Department of Education oversees teachers as well as certified nurse assistants. But other than that, everything would primarily, any other license would primarily fall under our bill.
Okay. Nate, Iowa?
Sure. So in Iowa, ours covers almost everything. I think the big one it doesn't cover would be attorneys. And that was the result of, I guess, how that's handled with separation of the executive branch and the judiciary. The other ones we don't cover are licenses that are issued by Department of Transportation, so some CDLs and things like that, anything that's under an interstate compact. So it doesn't necessarily mean, nurses, we're in the nurses compact, but if somebody wanted to just have a ability to practice here in Iowa, they could come through this pathway. But if they wanted a compact license, through us, they would have to go through the compact process and meet those standards. So those are the big ones that aren't covered in our bill, but generally it was every other profession.
John, would you be able to talk a little bit about the nature of interstate compacts and the role that they play in the whole universal licensing or universal recognition world?
Yeah, sure thing. So some states have adopted to put in place interstate compacts with other states. So, for example, if you have a license to be a nurse in Arizona, and Arizona is an interstate compact with a neighboring state, then you can travel between whatever states are within that compact to practice whatever particular occupation it is. Usually, that's not going to have too much of an impact under universal licensure, which basically says, look, you don't even need to be in a compact. If you're licensed in any state and you move into a receiving state and a state that has universal licensure, that state's going to go ahead and recognize your license. Some of the laws have carved out exceptions or exemptions for interstate compacts, but in our view, at least, the universal recognition is a superior policy response because it doesn't require the compact. States can enter and leave compacts. There can be different criteria that are imposed within the compact that might make it more onerous to get a license. Here, simply, if you hold a license outside the state and move into the state, it's going to be recognized.
And Arizona, do they have any exemptions, other exemptions, or which occupations are or aren't covered, if you're aware?
Ours is almost identical to Pennsylvania's and very similar to Iowa's. So we have a title that licenses most all of our professions, And previously, we had universal recognition for military members and their families. And so that law was simply amended to be for any resident in the state. Lawyers, because lawyers are annoying, are carved out. It's actually because, as the other panel members indicated, they're regulated by the Arizona Supreme Court, and then teachers are regulated under or licensed under a different code. So those are pretty much the major exceptions.
Okay, great. So there's a question up here that asks, could you comment on the efforts of some sort of libertarian-oriented public service legal organizations, and this might be to you especially, John, to remove state licensing requirements for certain professions using the argument that there is no real public safety interest with respect to those professions, so florists and things like that. You and the folks at the Institute for Justice and I think this Pacific Legal Foundation have been at the forefront of a lot of these legal efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. So what the viewer is referring to is oftentimes there's these licensing requirements that don't appear to have any connection to the public's health and safety, or don't really fit the stated public health and safety objective. So an obvious one would be something like a hair braider, where somebody as a profession braids hair. And many states have told those people that they need to go to cosmetology school if they want to practice their trade. And of course, cosmetology school requires training, in many cases, 1,600 to 1,800 hours of training at a cost of about $20,000. Virtually none of that training, in most cases, has to do with hair braiding. So you have states imposing on people that just want to practice their trade a requirement to go and get training that doesn't even apply to that trade, which appears in most cases to be pretty irrational. So those have been challenged by our organization, Institute for Justice, and some others that you mentioned. And the problem with this is that when you bring an occupational licensing case to court, courts review it under what's called rational basis review, which is essentially the lowest standard of legal review that's available. That's very different than something like strict scrutiny, which applies to free speech. So the end result is that a lot of these regulations are upheld, even if they're irrational, even if they're arbitrary. We in Arizona and at the Goldwater Institute developed legislation that was also passed in Arizona that raised that legal standard of review to something higher than rational basis. So it would address this problem when specific regulations simply don't match any public health or safety justification.
Great. Okay, so Nate and Katie and Meg or whoever is answering for Pennsylvania, I guess. Different chief executives approach legislation differently. What was your administration's role in the passage of some of this universal recognition in your state, and how were your governors, or if they were involved at all?
I'll go ahead and start. So as Governor Reynolds said, she called for these reforms in her condition of the state in January of this year. And, so the year before in 2019, we started working through this proposal and really, sort of spearheaded. There had been a licensing proposal that had come up under the prior governor, Governor Branstad, and literally was ripped up in committee by a Republican senator committee chair, even though it was a Republican governor's bill. And so we really did a lot of groundwork, and actually talking with Arizona was helpful. They explained to us, build those coalitions, get people to understand the concept and that it's not eliminating licensure. It's not, reducing standards or anything like that. So, met with legislators, met with a lot of the, licensed professions, interest groups, and sort of made sure they understood what we were proposing going forward. And those conversations continued as session started in January. And so this was a governor's bill. This was a governor's proposal. And so we were the driving sort of force behind getting the bill through the legislature. It was one of her priorities this year.
Katie?
Sure. So I would say our governor's pretty similar. This is a bill that he also called for after having our Department of State look into what challenges we have in Pennsylvania. So he, throughout the entire process of the bill, was very hands-on in working with the legislature and stakeholders to help come to a common ground that is a approach that the legislature and stakeholders and our office is all comfortable with, and one that works for us so that we could get this bill to his desk and help start our Pennsylvania workers have an easier time here.
Great. John, can you talk a little bit, if you're comfortable doing it, talk a little bit about what role policy institutes like ours and the Goldwater Institute and assorted other institutes can play in promoting this sort of reform in their states?
I think a really crucial role in a few different respects. One, a lot of policy organizations know what's been done elsewhere, what's been working. Oftentimes when these measures are going through the legislature, as you might imagine, the efforts are most successful when there's examples to point to in other states supported by evidence. And oftentimes those policy organizations will have that evidence marshaled and ready to go. They might also have really good examples of where occupational licensure has hurt individuals, so they can discuss individual cases in Nebraska or Iowa or Pennsylvania or wherever, where this person, was required to get a license, and it was really outrageous for these specific reasons, and that can really resonate. And then, of course, responding to objections. So oftentimes there's this argument that without licensure, there's going to be grave threats to the public's health and safety, or if a state recognizes other states' licenses, there's going to be grave threats to the public's health and safety. Being able to respond to those in a way that is informed and, again, supported by research and evidence that a lot of these policy organizations have at their disposal is very, very helpful.
Great. So I want to go back to one of the questions dropped in by one of our guests, who asked about the role of labor unions and other professional organizations, one assumes, in terms of playing a role in encouraging and maintaining stricter occupational licensing requirements. And this is sort of a process issue, probably, as you see as you're trying to move things through a legislature, who opposes it, or who moves to increase licensure? Katie?
Sure. So I think, as I said, our bill passed unanimously, I think, because we were able to work out any of these lingering questions between stakeholders such as unions around making sure that those unions that do fall under our occupations are still, we're still upholding standards that they're comfortable with while making it easier. So that's why we have some of our different requirements in our bill that are a little different from other states that require just a little bit more to make sure that everyone's at ease with our new law.
And that's really a big part of the process, is figuring out who's going to oppose and support these bills, and trying to figure out how to navigate so you don't lose the essence of the bill while making the changes that are needed in order to get something passed. Nate, have you had any particular experience?
Sure. So as I said, we had some conversations continued throughout session, and those were particularly with the trade unions because initially they were really skeptical of our bill and were asking a lot of questions about that the standards would be would be upheld for Iowa. An interesting, I guess, perspective on this is, in particular, electricians started to be licensed here in Iowa, I think about 10 years ago, actually, so pretty recently. And that was a large sort of compromise between the trade unions and the non-union contractors to develop this licensing system back then. And as you know, actually in 2019, we passed a bill related to criminal convictions, and it was just with plumbers, the plumbing board and the electrician board. And so as we came back to the topic, I know they were particularly concerned about what else sort of were we, potentially eroding under this sort of big compromise. Ultimately, as momentum got behind the bill, and it was clear that there was Iowans who wanted to see these reforms, the legislature was behind it. I think they changed from being opposed to the bill to neutral or in support. So, understanding that, again, we weren't reducing standards, You know, some of these are professions where, you know, we have neighboring states like Missouri who don't license electricians. If we can have some avenue for getting that talent here, you know, those might be future union members for them. Who knows? So certainly there's a lot of different parts to the discussions that had to happen ultimately to get the bill passed, and we got bipartisan support in the House, largely because those unions dropped their opposition to it before it was done. So,
John, anything?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think it would surprise anyone on this call or those who have looked closely at this issue to learn that most occupational licenses were not put in place because of cries from the public to protect the public's health and safety, but they were put in place by industries that wanted to prevent competition and keep out new entrants to the industries. And we still see that today when industries are asking for licensure. So of course the opposition is the incumbent industries, oftentimes supported by labor unions within those industries, you know, as a way to protect the existing industry, not necessarily to protect the public's health and safety. That said, I will say that measures like this that are broad and that apply across occupations rather than targeting specific occupations in a counterintuitive way are more, at least our experience has been, are more legislatively feasible than if lawmakers go in and try and repeal licenses for chimney sweepers or landscape architects or you name it, because then the special interests are really concentrated. It looks like that bill's really targeting them. And for whatever reason, when it's more holistic like this, while of course there is opposition from the incumbent industries, it is oftentimes not as intense.
So one of our commenters asks if there's any likelihood of extending these kinds of licensing privileges to fields such as law, medicine, and other health sciences. And we've covered the law because in many ways, the Supreme Courts of most states kind of run the show. They determine who's going to be admitted to the bar. And so legislatures and governors have less to say about the licensure of the legal profession. But what about physicians, nurses, other health science professions? What are you seeing in your state? What kinds of compacts are already out there that are making this de facto already? John, you want to start there?
Yeah, ours applies across the healthcare professions. So they're already in it in terms of universal recognition. That applies to physicians and nurses as well. And I would say for lawyers, look, lawyers aren't special here. I would say that state Supreme Courts would be very wise to take up this issue through the rulemaking process and to allow, you know, things like military spousal licensure, universal recognition for other attorneys in other states. I practice, and right now I have a case I'm arguing in New Jersey Supreme Court next week. Doesn't necessarily make you less of a lawyer if you're sitting here in Arizona. So I think state Supreme Court should take this up, and in states where the legislature does have a legislative option to license attorneys, legislature should consider that.
Katie?
So we're similar to Arizona. All of the medical and health sciences are already under our bill. So everything from medical doctors, osteopathic doctors, psychologists, they're already captured through all of this.
Nate?
Yeah, very similar. Again, we cover everything essentially except lawyers. And, you know, the one part of our bill that actually we did carve out those medical professions was the work experience. And that provision specifically applies to individuals coming from states that don't license a profession. But when we're talking about nurses and doctors and pharmacists, those are universally licensed across the country. So even though we carve them out, it doesn't really change anything. Obviously, I know John talked about the compacts. But, you know, the one nice thing with the compact, which the physicians are and nurses, is you actually don't have to get another license in that other state. You just are able to use your home state license as your license to operate in those other compact states. Whereas universal licensure, obviously, we're saying you come here with your skills. Now you can be licensed with very minimal barriers and hurdles to get through here in Iowa. So, you know, I think that, you know, particularly during this pandemic, the ability for nurses and doctors to be able to operate across state lines without jumping through any hoops at all, basically. That's a nice thing about the compacts in that process.
Yeah, so it's 11 o'clock in our time, which means that we are coming to the close. I want to really thank all of you for being here. I want to thank Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf and Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds for taking the time to be a part of our program. Jonathan and Katie and Nate and Meg, I want to thank you for being a part of this as well. The Platt Institute's brand new occupational licensing review is now available on our website at plattinstitute/policy. This video will be available on the Platt Institute's website under podcasts in a little while. And our third panel for today will take place at 1 p.m. Central Time and will be hosted by the Platt Institute's CEO, Jim Vocal, with the Revenue Committee Chair, Senator Lou Ann Linehan, Blueprint Nebraska Executive Director Jim Smith, and Tax Foundation Vice President Jared Walczyk, talking about what's next in Nebraska's tax policy debate. You can still sign up to be included in that discussion at plattinstitute.org/events. And I think Adam has put those put the link to the occupational licensing review in the chat section. So I want to thank you all again for joining us. Appreciate kind of the last minute nature of things and your willingness to be flexible to provide this information to folks here in Nebraska. And we look forward to working with you all again. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Laura.
Laura.
Thanks.